The phrase SOS started out as a maritime signal, often sent by Morse code to indicate distress. Officially, it doesn't stand for anything, though it's commonly thought of to stand for Save Our Souls. Now it's become more of a catch-all term for help messages, and SOS messages have been used to save lives and even help solve crimes. Number 5. Wearable devices like Apple Watches can seem like a waste of money for some, but to others, they've proven to be literally life-saving. Everyday things like monitoring health vitals can be used for generally helping to lead a better lifestyle, but there have been a number of occasions when the device's SOS features have actually saved lives. For example, in 2019, 2 kayakers were rescued after their kayaks sank off the coast of Puerto Rico. One used the emergency SOS feature to contact local emergency services and share their location with the Coast Guards. In December of 2020, an Apple Watch led to the rescue of a woman in the US, though this time the rescue was from something much more sinister. The woman in question remains unnamed. She was taken from outside of her apartment in San Antonio while her daughter watched helplessly from inside. The victim was arguing with a man named Adalberto Longoria while inside the flatbed truck she was driving. Longoria was drunk at the time and wouldn't get out of the truck. He demanded she get her things from the back of the truck and go. Longoria immediately moved into the driver's seat and pulled away from the apartment complex. The victim screamed, but her daughter was unable to see which direction they had gone in. Longoria tormented the victim as he sped away, suddenly applying the brakes to make her fall onto the floor of the bed multiple times. During the ordeal, the victim was able to use her smartwatch to contact her daughter and police. The watch sent the victim's emergency contacts regular updates that gave her location and allowed the police to find her without any trouble. Thankfully, Longoria was scared off by the thought of police before he could do any serious harm to the victim. He had stopped at a hotel parking lot, and when the victim told him she had contacted police, he simply threw money at her, told her to put it on his books, and hopped a fence to escape before they could arrive. He was apprehended a few weeks later and charged with aggravated kidnapping. The story of a domestic violence victim contacting authorities under the guise of ordering a pizza has become well known and repeated on social media and various TV shows. But it's not the only time people have used pizza as a way to get SOS messages to the outside world. It helps that pizza and fast food deliveries will generally need an address to deliver your food, so giving out a location for authorities to report to isn't too suspicious. But it's a different situation when trying to send a message when ordering a pizza to be picked up in store. However, that was the only way the wife of 22-year-old Roberto Dominguez had of getting a message out when she was held against her will by her husband in 2019. The couple lived in New Mexico, near the border with Texas, when Dominguez's violent behavior hit a new extreme. He wouldn't let his wife leave the house without him. He would be violent towards her and even tied her up inside their house. It's not known how long Dominguez had been holding his wife captive when, in July of 2019, he decided that they would get Domino's pizza. He called a store across the state border and ordered a pizza for pickup. Possibly because he didn't want to leave his wife alone, he made her come with him when he went to pick up the pizza, and for some reason she was allowed to go into the store to get it. The woman didn't have much time, but she was able to write a note to give to the cashier. As she paid for the pizza, she slipped him the note, which told him she was being held against her will. Both Dominguez and his wife were gone by the time the cashier looked at the note and realized something was very wrong. Thankfully, he took the note seriously and contacted police, who arrived at around midnight. Officers also took the note seriously and were able to track Dominguez down to a house in New Mexico. Working with authorities there, they arrived at the house just an hour later, finding the victim tied up and gagged on the floor. It also appeared she suffered more abuse in the few hours it had been since she managed to get the SOS message to the pizza store worker. The woman was thankfully rescued, and her husband was charged with domestic assault and kidnapping. Number 3. Most SOS messages aren't the stereotypical letters written in the dirt or with stones in some secluded area. But sometimes this is exactly what's needed to help locate someone in distress. Deborah Pilgrim was a 55-year-old woman from Australia who disappeared while camping in 2019. She and a group of friends were camping on the outskirts of Sedan, a rural town in South Australia. Early one morning, she decided to go for a walk, but never came back. Her friends and family couldn't explain why she would have wandered off. It was an incredibly hostile environment, and Deborah didn't leave prepared for a long walk in those conditions. As hours turned to days, her friends feared the worst. Deborah had pre-existing health conditions, which meant if even the environment hadn't been deadly, she would have been in serious danger without her medication. Added to that was the extreme heat and the threat of venomous snakes. Rescuers were extremely concerned for her safety. Meanwhile, Deborah had had no intention of anything more than a short walk when she left the campsite that morning. After about 2 hours, though, she realized she'd become disoriented at some point and had no idea where she was or how to get back to her friends. She climbed a windmill at one point to try to get a bearing of her location, but she couldn't even locate a road. The area is extremely sparsely populated, and any houses or shacks Deborah did come across were empty. At one point, she drank dirty water and spent hours lying under a tree with a burning fever, but she knew she had to go on. Even if the chances of finding someone out here was very slim, Deborah didn't give up hope that someone would come to check on their properties here. She left messages on abandoned cars and at houses and kept looking for security cameras or sirens or some way to contact civilization, as well as food and clean water to keep her going. After a few days, she finally found what she was looking for: a shack with a CCTV camera outside, as well as a water tank she could drink from. Deborah wrote the letters SOS in the dirt in front of the camera, just hoping someone would see the message and the camera wasn't broken. She waited outside the shack, grateful for the clean water, and eating from a can of tomatoes she had found. The shack was owned by a former police detective. He didn't really pay much attention usually, but he'd heard about the search for Deborah, so he decided to check the cameras once a day. The day after Deborah had left the message, he noticed the letters and alerted authorities. Thankfully, Deborah hadn't moved from the location before the owner could send rescue workers. She was found 3 days after she had disappeared, in relatively good health against the odds, and was reunited with her family. Number 2. It was only thanks to quick thinking and preparedness that Tara Stevens was able to stop her soon-to-be ex-boyfriend from taking her life when he attacked her in September of 2020. Jason Flock was already a convicted criminal involved in a gang in Wolverhampton, UK. He was a 20-year-old and had fired an illegal weapon at rival gang members and was sentenced to 7 years behind bars for the crime. It wasn't his first offense against the rival gang either. At the time, the judge said the scene resembled something from a film, but it was all too real. 5 years after being released, it seemed Fluck hadn't left his life of violence and crime behind. After he was released, he began dating Tara, who lived in Cardiff at the time. However, it didn't appear to be an easy relationship, and Tara kept her emergency contacts up to date to be prepared for the worst. In September of last year, the two went on a day trip to Liverpool. Tara had driven from Cardiff to her boyfriend's house, and Fluck had driven them both to Liverpool. While on a walk in the city, Tara somehow discovered Fluck was in a long-term relationship with another woman and tried to break up with him. Fluck immediately became violent and attacked Tara, who would later recall that at one point she stopped breathing. It didn't seem like Fluck would stop until he had actually taken her life. She managed to send an SOS message to her friend, and Fluck finally stopped. But it wasn't the end of the ordeal, and Tara seemed to know this. She told her friend if she didn't make it back to Cardiff that day to call the police, apparently expecting something bad to happen. Thankfully, Fluck allowed Tara to return home, and he went on the run. He was never very far from his now ex-girlfriend though. Over the next few months, he stalked Tara, breaking into her home to take back items he had given her during their relationship, causing thousands of dollars worth of damages to her car, and harassing her to the point Tara was scared for her life. He sent hundreds of abusive texts with the intention of making Tara's life unbearable. Finally, police were able to catch up with Fluck and he was arrested. After being caught, he pleaded guilty to stalking, burglary, and assault and was sentenced to 2 years in prison. Number 1. More than 6,000 migrant workers were rescued from kilns where they were being held against their will, after one brave 19-year-old girl managed to get an SOS message out to the outside world. Bonded labor is the most common form of slavery. People take out a loan, which is repaid through free labor, usually in grueling conditions. As the people cannot leave, their living expenses are added to their debt, which often makes the debt impossible to pay off. Manasi Kamari was a 19-year-old girl from India when she, her father, and her sister were forced into bonded labor when they had to take out a loan to pay for her mother's medical bills. Her family and about 350 more workers were sent to a brick kiln where they would work from 4:30 a.m. to the late evening. They had very few facilities, and with wages as low as 250 rupee per week, it would have taken them several months to pay off the initial debt without the additional expenses. When the COVID-19 pandemic began to take hold in India, the government ordered the kilns to be shut down. However, the kiln owner wasn't happy to just let his workers go. The workers were told they could leave, but only if they met a certain target within a week. The laborers worked for more than 14 hours a day in the middle of the outbreak to try to meet the target. Many achieved the goal as they wanted to go back to their families, but it wouldn't be enough for the kiln owner. He refused to let them go home and tried to force them to continue working. When the workers protested and tried to leave anyway, the people in charge became violent, and many of the workers were attacked. Some had serious head injuries, but nobody was allowed to seek medical attention. During the chaos, Manasi managed to hide. She still had her phone and used it to send photos of what was happening to every one of her contacts. The photos were leaked onto social media, and charity organizations were able to figure out their location. The local authorities were contacted, and 30 brick kilns, including the one where Manasi worked, were raided. Thousands of workers who'd been trafficked from across northeast India were freed and allowed to return to their families. The owner was identified as a repeat offender who'd already been found guilty of bonded labor 3 times in the past. He fled the scene, though a number of the thugs he had hired to attack his workers were arrested. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, be sure to click that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But I've been Ty Knots, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.